Hello there. Welcome to another episode of Angels Lounge, the one program where we deep dive and check in on our favorite angels all across Africa. And on the program today, we have a very, very interesting guest, my paddy. My paddy is in the building. Ladies and gentlemen, the founder and chief executive at Metalex. I don't know what Metalex Industries or Metalex Metalworks. He will sort himself when he comes in. Ladies and gentlemen, Ayo Sopitan is here with us. He's our featured angel for Yay! Ewaya. Ayo, as
What's
you
going on?
introduce Yay!
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you clearly. Welcome to the
All right,
program, Ayo.
perfect. So it's Metalex Commodities, but in certain subsidiaries we go by Metalex Africa just to reflect the fact that we're mostly working in Africa. But yeah, so
Great,
thanks for the introduction.
great stuff. Good to have you here. Where you did? Where's your present
Current,
location?
currently currently in Houston, so I split time between being in mine pits in very remote parts of Africa to return and spending time with my family in Houston. So currently in Houston, headed back to the continent next week. So
Awesome, awesome. Great, great,
yeah.
great, great. So how's it been? Has work in the mines?
Yeah, well, these are important days, important times for my industry. So I like to tell everybody that everything that we interact with is either farmed or mined. So the shirt you're wearing, is well, mostly cotton, probably. That's farmed,
Hmm.
and your computer, all the components, a lot of that stuff is mined, right?
Hmm.
So given that, that reality and the fact that the world is really is hungry for these materials. It's an interesting time for me, for our business, and we're trying to take advantage, but do it in a way that we can be proud of, so that we don't leave mines behind that endanger lives and so on and so forth. So yeah, going
Great.
well. Yeah.
So I'm a bit curious. Black boy from Nigeria. What was it with mining? Yo, why mining? What was that? What's that?
Well, I'm not sure if I've said this anywhere publicly, but if I thought I was starting a mining company, I probably wouldn't have started.
Mm,
When I was starting my business, I told everybody that would listen that I was trying to start a trading company, a commodity. That's why the company is called Metalex, Metal Exchange. You know, and the reason I got into that space in the first place was because I had spent a lot of time in commodity trading and risk management in New York and in London, and
okay.
basically noticed that there's a lot of these the metals that the world is trading and everybody's sort of making a lot of money on. A lot of that comes from Africa, right? So, being the African guy in the room, typically the only African guy in the room, um, I felt like I was on the wrong side of the table. So, I decided to go to ground and find these resources, and naturally went back to Nigeria because you do these things out of the assumption that home will be easy, right? And yeah, so started going to Nigeria looking for whatever I could find, and
Okay.
uh, yeah, there's a lot more there to the story, but the background is that I worked in this space for many years, for about 10 years,
Okay.
and then uh, calculated where the opportunities were and basically moved in. Yeah.
And so I'm curious, how has that been? How has that played out? You've been in the news now and again, and the amount of money you're making and the killing. And give
No,
us some gist.
no. So I think so at the very beginning, what I was trying to do was be an aggregator of mined material, right? So in Nigeria, we do a lot of mining. There are a couple of million people who live on mining, subsistent mining, just in the same way that there's subsistent agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem is Solomon, the miner in Niger State, is mining 1 ton a month, right? 1 ton a month in almost any metal, except if you're talking about gold, 1 ton a month is nothing, right?
Right.
So Solomon's volume isn't worth anything. So we said, let's be an aggregator of thousands of Solomons, right?
Okay.
Let's get all their material together, put it in a warehouse, repackage it, and send
Send
to
abroad.
consumer markets, right?
Oh,
But the problem with that was there aren't enough Solomons in any given area. Um,
okay.
that's one problem. The other problem is the guys who actually produce enough don't necessarily need us.
Need you.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's another problem in that, okay, so the first two that I highlighted are problems around volume. So how much mined material can I find using that approach? Uh,
Yeah.
the third problem is really around quality. Uh,
Okay.
People say Nigeria is blessed, Africa is blessed, right? I have a front row seat to the numerical value of of those blessings, like, and it's huge. Okay, so it's
Wow.
ridiculous, right? So you have places like in Niger State, in Nasarawa, in Taraba that I've been to where you dig the ground a little bit and you have very high quality material, right? The problem is getting that in large volumes, right? So we then said, okay, for us to be successful, we need to actually start operating mines ourselves because
Okay.
there aren't enough miners that we could rely on because we would go
Right.
out, sign these contracts, in the international market, but not be able to fulfill those contracts because there
Demand.
just
Yeah.
isn't enough material. So we said, look, let's do it ourselves, right? So we started doing that, and then we found that yes, by doing that, you solve your volume problem, but the next problem around quality, the only way you can solve that problem is to become a processor. So that's what we
Wow.
do now. So
Oh,
we
okay.
mine and we process. Yeah. So
Let's shift a little away from mining and come to
yes,
you as the angel. How
yes.
has that been? What informed that in the first place?
So I read a tweet by Jason Calcanis in 2017 where he said, start investing as soon as you can. At that point, I was a relatively well compensated, senior level person in corporate America, right?
Okay.
So I was like, look, I have some money, but not a lot, right? So so how do I start participating in what at the time was a very interesting market, right? I had started a company with a couple of guys whose names you probably would recognize in 2009, right? So this was
Okay.
when a bunch of people who had been educated abroad were coming back to Nigeria and trying different things. So I started this company, got some investment from I don't even know if I'm allowed to say names and things, but anyway, from
You can say
some
it if you want to. If you don't want to, it's fine.
yeah, I'm
No, no.
not yeah, I'm sort of going back and forth. But anyway, so I started this company and it felt like we were participating in what was an emerging um startup ecosystem. But
Yeah.
that company didn't end up going anywhere. Some of my co-founders, one joined Paystack, another one started his own thing, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
But now you had what I would consider maybe the third wave of startups to starting to blow up. And so I felt like, we have some extra savings here and there that we could start throwing into these companies and got involved in some syndicates,
Okay.
which wrote lots of checks. So we would put a block of money into like an annual syndicate. They write the checks. We had very little involvement in the screening of those opportunities. So there was that
Okay.
formal angel sort of activity. And
Mm-hmm.
then there was the other one where there's always someone in your network who says, Bros, I
Trust.
heard
Yeah.
about this, blah, 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 blah. So that was interesting because you meet a guy, you're the infectious energy, you see his deck, you're like, ah, man, fantastic. And then you throw a bit of money in and, by vibes and inshallah, I hope that he comes back. Hope he comes back in a couple of
Yeah.
years and says, hey, I've done this, right? So did a few of those as well. But the
Mm-hmm.
funny thing, the most interesting thing for me in all of this was the one thing that I did with the least amount of due diligence. There's like just I didn't even like my brother-in-law calls me one day and says, "Hey, there's this company, they're raising some money, blah blah blah. Do you want to participate?" And I was like, "Are you doing it?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "How much do I need to put in?" And he told me the amount. I'm like, "Look, man, I'll give you 75% of that amount,
Mm-hmm.
like show back, go back, that kind of
Yeah.
you know, and sent the money, and that's yielded, sort of the biggest return.
Returns. Returns
Yes,
yet.
yeah, so far, yeah. So, and then so been lucky to be part of syndicates that participated in some well-known success stories as
Okay,
well.
no, so yeah, this is the part of the movie where I force you to mention them success stories because usually when we say that, hey, our angels at land have success stories, people think it's audio success. So yeah, I put you on the spot now. Mention names, man, nigga.
Okay, yeah, no, I think I can. I mean, so I was part of a syndicate that did Lemfi, right? So, and yeah, so that
So there's
yielded.
so there's Lemfi. Which other good one can you remember?
Which other? I think Lemfi in terms of because we invest. So I say we because it's my wife and I, but we do like stuff here as well in the US. So there's some US stuff that have done well. But I think Lemfi, as I'm thinking about it now, would be the
The,
biggest thing
the biggest one, yeah.
that I've been part of, just both in terms of the paper returns and then I think the last big round they raised, our syndicate sold out a few things and yeah,
Great
so
stuff.
they sold
Great
out a
stuff.
portion of the holding. So yeah.
Whole thing, yeah, yeah. Okay, but so doing Metalex, being a founder before, you and I had gone through that very expansive story of the startup you alluded to earlier and how that didn't play out, and how I
Yeah.
asked, why didn't you go back to it? I'm like, bros, leave that matter alone.
Yeah.
But so what works for you in a founder? What makes you want to back a founder?
So I try to be in general just like be humble, right? And what I mean by that is no one knows the future. Uh, there are founders that I met uh, uh, at the same time as, so it's, guys that are both doing fintech, right? Met them sort of at similar points in their journeys. And one guy was very soft-spoken, seemed even shy, and and the other guy was brash and will take over the world. The former, had a pretty significant exit, and the latter is no longer doing what he was doing at the time. Right
The,
now,
the, the,
doesn't
the la- the latter is not like trying to take over the world anymore.
don't humble. But so I think and I say this with with humility in that, look, you never quite know. Now, with that said, I would say that if I was able to tease out a method to find a particular attribute, um, uh, I would say that I'm looking for someone who doesn't give up easily.
Mm-hmm.
I know that because, like, I'm doing the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, running
Wow.
this company.
Mm-hmm.
The hardest thing by far. I mean, like, very, very difficult, going to difficult places, raising money, like trying to make sure your investors are happy, having
Mm-hmm.
fights with long time friends who backed you early, like all these just difficult things where, someone said recently in a meeting I was in, it's like, entrepreneurship is like chewing glass. So I'm looking for people
Jack.
who want to chew glass and then have cold water to wash it down, right? You know, and
Oh
that's
God.
it. And to me, that basically means knowing that if this doesn't work, like I like what's at stake is how I like to put it. If it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work and you just go on to idea number two, uh, like you hear guys talk about, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Okay, I need to know that if this thing fails, you feel like you are finished. Like that
Indeed.
sort of, like that sort of urgency.
That level of immersion in it.
Yes. Yeah, you need to be all in, like all the way in. And I think about it from my own personal journey, like, you know, I could never allow this company to fail because the failure of it will cost me everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I need to like be able to tease that out in a founder. Outside of the other stuff like the idea and like the market, all the stuff that people talk about. Yeah,
But a person could be immersed in something that is senseless.
absolutely. So I would say that I was in my own personal business at the beginning. And at some point you realize like, hey man, what I'm doing doesn't make any sense. I need to rethink things, right? And a lot of companies go through those phases where you're like, man, no, this is not going to work. And then being honest enough with yourself to say, I'm going to take a different direction, or I'm going to uh, shut this down and start something else or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that they've given up, right? Like, that's not like pivoting isn't giving up, right?
Indeed.
Um,
Indeed.
Pivoting is pivoting. I'm changing directions because, Uh, there's a bumper sticker I saw many years ago, and these things sometimes they just stick in your head.
They just stick in
And
your
and,
head.
and so this guy had a bumper sticker that says, "If you're headed the wrong way, remember God allows U-turns."
Indeed. Indeed. Indeed.
And in entrepreneurship, I mean, sometimes you may need to make a U-turn, you may need to make a sharp right, a sharp left, or whatever. But the key is the guys who never stop moving, right?
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, so I'm back at Metalex, and then I'm wondering, so how has Africa, doing business in Africa, affected the business? So w- I'm comparing that to if you were mining in Colombia or somewhere in South America, for example, or you were mining, I don't know where else I can remember where they have a lot of mining activity, or mining even in the US, what has that difference been like?
Yeah. And I think it's a very smart question, by the way, because these are so the most prominent mining economies in the world are like Canada, Australia, a lot of South American countries, and then you have countries like DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. You have
Yeah.
countries like Zambia, where we spend a lot of our time. Um, I would say one of the big differences eh, there are pros and cons, obviously. In
Okay.
America, for example, permitting is a big issue. Getting permits to do anything
Permits.
is like
Yeah.
can take a long time, right? If you want to get a mining permit in Nigeria, yeah, eh, or in some of these other countries, happens relatively quickly.
Okay.
So that's a good thing. Um, the bad thing is, so we had an opportunity recently to get involved with a mine in Chile, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Um, or no, forget Chile, actually. Even within Africa, there's a lot of variability, right? So we
Hmm.
were doing some stuff in Morocco some years ago. The infrastructure in Morocco, like getting from the mine to the port, was fantastic. Like,
Wow. Yeah.
the availability of services, like people who provide trucking services and things like that, very available, very
Great.
transparent. There's a
Great
rate,
stuff.
everything is organized. I would say that the biggest issue we have is a lack of organization, loose regulation sometimes, so in Africa. And then I would say some people problem. I don't like to say these things publicly, but
Mhm.
sometimes we
It's there.
if we consider this a family conversation, then we need to be able to say some of these things, right? So we have
Yeah.
people problems where someone who's supposed to do X doesn't do it. And when you complain, you're the bad guy, right?
Right.
Like, you,
Right.
yeah. So that there are those types of issues, and very little consequence for bad behavior as well, right? So you have someone who's supposed to deliver X, they deliver zero point 0.5 X, and then you say, I'll fight you, I report you to EFCC, then you do, and then what, right? It all depends on who the person is. If they have
Indeed.
the power, you know what I mean? So those types of issues are still there. I truly believe that the day we decide that we're going to have strong institutions like uh, you know government agencies that do what they're supposed to do. People who say they're going to do X and they do X.
They
Like
deliver on it.
we're going to transform the continent. I think but until then, I guess we'll keep navigating.
We'll just keep fighting. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What has worked for you at LAN? What has been the thing that made it interesting and work for you at LAN?
It's for me. It's a very simple thing. It's flexibility. So I like the fact that I'm exposed to a number of opportunities, and I'm not under pressure to participate or not.
Or
Right.
not?
So
Yeah.
I think that's great. You know. Um, so flexibility. I like some of the guys that I've connected with as well outside of just so the network is
Mhm.
great. And yeah, I would say the flexibility and the network. The I think I've heard of transactions that I probably wouldn't have heard of because especially because I don't go to Nigeria as much as I used to.
As much.
So I think that's another point of value. Yeah. So it's just access
Great,
to
great
opportunities.
stuff.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Um, so what would you say that, compared to your other experiences, will be the things that we should be doing generally as an ecosystem to make the investing space better for local and investors in the diaspora?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this actually because so I'm currently doing a fellowship program at MIT where we're traveling around the continent studying different markets, and uh, And the goal is to basically take those lessons, apply it to our own ventures, apply it as ecosystem leaders, apply it as people who are trying to actually use entrepreneurship to move the needle in terms of like sustainable development, right? Not the
Right.
UN sustainable development, but like development that stays. That's the thing, right? And one of the things that's come out of those conversations is the people in VC talk like VC is the only thing that Africa needs, right? And they're loud, right? So these are like leaders who have a loud voice, right? So for example, our cohort of 15 people, we were in Egypt meeting with, someone in the meeting was like, so an entrepreneur that's part of the cohort asked the question about, hey, I'm in a highly regulated space. How do you, as a venture capitalist, think about regulated companies, blah, blah, blah. And the guy was like, don't be in regulated businesses, right? And I was like, that's such a, it's a very self-unaware comment, but it's reflective, in my opinion, of how the VC universe likes to look at the world in Africa,
Okay.
right? I think we need to understand that VC is a piece of a bigger puzzle, right?
Indeed.
And someone has to fund businesses that like the first thing is we need to stop thinking that it's going to be copy and paste from San Francisco to Lagos, right?
It won't work. It won't work.
It doesn't work, right? There, we need the foundation, right? We need a base because it's the base that will then make these startups have customers that they can go after, right?
Indeed.
Remember when people would come and say our total addressable market is 200 million, and and if we only capture 2.5%, and the idea behind that 2.5% was, it's a small number, it's attainable, blah blah blah, right? Like, and then people realize that of the 200 million, half a million people are the only ones that have more than 1 million naira in their account, right? Then
Indeed.
you learn very quickly that your 200 million is
It's
not
not.
what
It's
it
not. It's
seems.
not really. Yeah. It's not what you think it is.
And what that points to me is that we don't have enough people that are just doing okay, right? So we have like, maybe 100,000 people that are very wealthy, maybe a million that are like, okay. And then everybody is just struggling, right? Like, you know what I mean? And so you come up with
Yeah.
some solution and people need to pay for it. Well, no one can afford it, right? So we need, we need to look at businesses that build the base, right?
Indeed. Indeed.
Kola Masha's business, Babangona, as an outside observer, I love businesses like that. I think
Mm.
they're essential, right? There's a company in Tanzania called Export Trading Group. Again, commodities businesses, but they are critical because they create thousands of jobs at scale. And
Mm.
those guys then become customers to the fancy apps and the this and that we need to build, right?
Yeah.
So I think thinking that VC and angel investing and all of that, thinking of it as a small piece of a bigger puzzle, um, I think is
Really
one thing
well.
that we need
Yeah.
to start thinking about. But yeah, I could say one more thing. Actually, let me just throw this in there. So
Okay.
I read something recently that if you take all the funding in the U.S. market that happens, right? So that's corporate loans, that's whatever, like different types of funding, right?
Funding. Yeah.
Project finance, all of that.
Yeah.
VC is 2%. Okay.
Mm.
VC is 2% of total funding in the US. As a percentage of jobs that have been created, or that jobs that exist today in America, VC backed companies created about, sometimes you read 19, sometimes you read 20%, right? So VC is a great point of leverage, right? So 2% of the funding, 21% of the jobs, right? So that's, 10%, right?
Right.
Fantastic. But the way I see that is 80% is non-VC backed.
True that.
And that's what we in Africa need to, like,
To
that's
think
what we
about.
need to start thinking about, right?
Yeah.
What is that 80% and how do we make sure it exists?
Really, really, really deep and brilliant thoughts. We could drag this conversation, but we've got
Sure.
to go. We've got to go. Thank you, Ayo. So what's going on at Metalex? Is there a way that as people in Lagos, as the network, Lagos Angel Network, as your fans, is there a way to support the work going on? We're your
Yeah.
fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think, following us on LinkedIn is something that I recommend because we try to be outward and say this is what's going on, this is what we're doing. So we're working on launching our processing facility in Zambia that
Okay.
will process about 2 million tons of ore per year,
Wow.
which will make us one of the biggest in Zambia, right? One second. I need to. Yeah, anyway, so we're working on that. And that should be live sometime in June,
Okay.
hopefully. And then beyond that, as a sort of like a medium term to long term vision, I personally believe that there are hundreds of medium scale mines, what are called in the industry mining juniors across
Okay.
the continent. And I
Okay.
think that it's a transformative opportunity that I think everyone should think about. And thirdly, I think everyone needs a certain percentage of their net worth exposed to the commodities space.
Commodities, yeah.
So you can get that by investing in the public markets. It's the least effective way, but invest in, I don't know, mining companies like public companies. The other way is to participate in some of these companies early. So, like a lot of our investors have done. And so, one of the things that we will be pushing out sometime in the next 18 months is what we're calling like an SPV factory, like a mining company in a box. Internally, is how we
Okay.
talk about it, where we package this thing and then sort of put it out. To a small network of people to participate as investors, as minority investors. But like that, those are things that are in the horizon. But in terms of support, just following us and helping to amplify our message that we're trying to evangelize is another way to do it.
Great stuff, Ayo. This has been really interesting. Thank you for stopping in, making time to share thoughts with me on the lounge. Yo, you cannot be harassing me now. What's wrong with you? I came through, man. All right. So
All right,
we'll
bro.
talk again soon. Thank you so much for doing this. Bye.
Not a problem at all. All right, speak soon.